It's a pleasure to take part in the second reading of the Student Loan Scheme Exemptions and Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Bill. And I would like to start off, Mr Speaker, by pointing out that National did commit to keeping interest-free student loans in place. And on that basis, we recognise that as a very generous contribution by taxpayers to tertiary education students, that we want to see that the whole process around the student loan scheme is tidy, appropriate and fair. So effectively that in itself, Mr Speaker, is the very essence of this bill. It does tidy up a number of areas that adds enhancement to the student loan scheme and gives people certainty and clarity. And we need to do that because effectively there is 500,000 New Zealanders who do have student loans, and therefore it does have a significant impact on the Crown accounts as a debt to be managed. And it is in the region of $10 billion. So we want to see that those people who enter into a student loan get quality education and that the country in return receives the most benefit from those people's higher education by way of completions and success and students realising their potential. One concern on this side of the House and Government that we do have is that under the previous administration there was a total lack of incentives to repay one's student loan. And in actual fact, when we look through the behaviour of the tertiary education sector, there was a general sloppiness. And that's why the government in September introduced the 10% bonus repayment basis, that if somebody paid over $500 of their student loans above their minimum requirement, we would give them a benefit or a bonus on that. So in that context, Mr Speaker, this bill has come through the House courtesy of the Minister of Revenue who has oversight of it. And I would really encourage everybody in the House here to go into the website and download the student loan annual report. And it's actually quite staggering reading, but I believe that the very principle itself is a good balance, because within the context of this bill and the student loan scheme itself, there is an enormous amount of public good, but done properly, there is an even greater, Mr Speaker, a greater amount of individual good, and that's what we want to see. So getting on to the bill here, interest-free loans for residents of the realm countries. I think myself that when you think of anything that we do within our region, and when I'm talking about our region, Mr Speaker, I refer to the South Pacific effectively, we do a lot to aid those countries, be it Niue, be it Tokelau's or Cook Islands. They are countries that have rights under our laws, and those rights are access to interest-free student loans. When they come to New Zealand, up until date, when they returned home, that was not the case. So this bill appropriately extends that provision so that they can continue to have interest-free loans when they return to their home islands. And that's really good, because not only does that benefit the islands themselves, it also it balances out their rights as to the student loan scheme. Otherwise, invariably, they would stay here to continue to have that right. And those countries, those islands, certainly do have an enormous need to be supported and to grow economically. And that's what one hopes is gained out of the student loan scheme. So effectively from the period as this bill is brought into law, that will apply. Overseas study, again, a very interesting aspect dealt with in the student loan scheme here, this amendments, exemptions and miscellaneous provisions amendment bill. Presently, there's a gap in our education system, and there is no ability at times for students to be able to continue their studies, even though there may be a formal relationship between an institution in New Zealand and an overseas institution. So this bill addresses that, and where there is a formal agreement between the New Zealand government, between the New Zealand education provider and an overseas tertiary provider, there will now be that opportunity to retain the status of an interest-free student loan. Up to date, as soon as you left the country effectively, doing study or working, the calculator would start ticking away. That in itself, I trust that it is something that we can manage. It needs to be registered as to what those institutions are, what courses they are taking, and it needs to be at that higher level and one that is not provided in New Zealand. So that in itself is fair, but we must remember that when the interest-free student loan scheme, Mr. Speaker, was implemented, it came to the Minister of Revenue's attention that there was some 40,000 students overseas claiming interest-free student loans, but not really deserving of them. So that had to be tidied up. So exemptions are quite an important aspect of the student loan bill in this amendment stage, and we look to see that tidies up matters respectfully around that particular issue, because we do want to see the full gambit of opportunities opened up to students, whether they're doing masters, PhDs or whatever. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that's probably I thought would be quite controversial, and it is with regards to the Greens' view, is that Inland Revenue will have the ability to increase the payment from 10 cents in the dollar up to 15 cents in the dollar for borrowers who have failed to have the correct deductions made or pay any other amount that when it is overdue. That is not including an occasion where there was clearly under examination by the Select Committee, Mr. Speaker, where there were failure by IRD to send out the appropriate notification of payments, and that would be quite unfair to be ruthless and claw that back in an unsensitive way. However, there are many situations where the IRD department does, or the Inland Revenue does, need that flexibility. And when we're talking about 10 cents to 15 cents, it's not just one or the other. It is a sliding scale, Mr. Speaker. So, yeah, this bill, whilst it's small, and when we look at the speeches during the first reading, a lot of reference was made to not a lot of substance in this bill, but really it is an important aspect going forward. It adds, it critiques, and it improves the very aspects of the student loan bill, and it is fair, balanced, and generally speaking, the Select Committee worked through collegially, and I believe that the advice that we got from officials was very appropriate, and the bill as it has returned to the House, Mr. Speaker, I believe is still much in the same vein as it was at its first reading. A couple of amendments that we made recommendations, and it was good to see that the Minister has picked up on those, and on that very basis it is a pleasure to commend this bill to the House in the second reading. Thank you.